In the 1960s, the world stood divided between two powerful ideologies, capitalism and communism. The Cold War had turned the globe into a chessboard. Every region became a potential battlefield. In Southeast Asia, one small country would become the center of one of the most controversial wars in modern history, Vietnam. For nearly 2 decades, the United States invested blood, money, and reputation into a war thousands of miles from home. More than 58,000 American soldiers would die. Millions of Vietnamese civilians and soldiers would lose their lives. But why did America go to Vietnam? What went wrong? And how did this war change the United States forever? This is the story of the Vietnam War. Chapter 1, Roots of Conflict. To understand the Vietnam War, we must go back to the end of World War II. Vietnam had been a colony of France. During World War II, Japan occupied the region. After Japan's defeat in 1945, Vietnamese nationalist leader Ho Chi Minh declared independence. However, France wanted to reclaim its colony. This led to the First Indochina War. In 1954, Vietnamese communist forces defeated the French at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. The Geneva Accords temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel. North Vietnam, communist led by Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam, anti-communist government supported by the United States. National elections were supposed to reunify the country. They never happened. The United States feared the domino theory, the belief that if Vietnam fell to communism, other Asian countries would follow. Chapter 2. America enters the war. At first, America only sent advisors to help South Vietnam. But in 1964, everything changed. The Gulf of Tonkin incident involved alleged attacks on U.S. ships by North Vietnamese forces. Following this event, President Lyndon B. received approval from Congress to expand military operations. Soon, American combat troops were deployed in large numbers. By 1968, more than 500,000 U.S. troops were stationed in Vietnam. Operation Rolling Thunder began, a massive bombing campaign over North Vietnam. America believed superior firepower would guarantee victory, but Vietnam was not a conventional battlefield. Chapter 3. Guerrilla Warfare and the Viet Cong. The enemy was difficult to identify. The Viet Cong, communist, guerrilla fighters in South Vietnam, blended into villages and jungles. They used tunnels, ambushes, booby traps, and surprise attacks. American soldiers faced dense jungles, extreme heat, monsoon rains, invisible enemies. Despite technological superiority, morale among U.S. troops began to decline. The war became a war of attrition, counting bodies instead of gaining territory. Chapter 4. The Tet Offensive. In January 1968, during the Vietnamese New Year celebration, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a massive coordinated attack across South Vietnam. This was the Tet Offensive. Although U.S. forces eventually pushed back the attacks, the psychological impact was devastating. For years, the American government had claimed the war was nearly won. But television footage showed intense fighting in major cities. Public confidence collapsed. The war was no longer just overseas. It had entered American living rooms. Chapter 5. Protests at home. Back in the United States, opposition grew rapidly. College campuses erupted in protest. Millions marched in cities demanding an end to the war. In 1970, the Kent State, shootings shocked the nation when National Guard troops opened fire on student protesters. Prominent figures spoke out. Boxer Muhammad Ali refused military service, stating he had no quarrel with the Vietnamese people. Television journalists reported uncensored images of war casualties. For the first time in American history, media coverage deeply influenced public opinion about an ongoing war. Chapter 6. Controversial Weapons and Human Cost. The U.S. military used napalm and a chemical defoliant called Agent Orange to destroy jungle cover. These chemicals caused severe burns, birth defects, and long-term environmental damage. One of the darkest incidents was the My Lai massacre, where American soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians. Trust between citizens and government eroded. The human cost of the war became undeniable. Chapter 7. Withdrawal and Fall of Saigon. President Richard Nixon introduced a strategy called Vietnamization, gradually withdrawing U.S. troops while training South Vietnamese forces. Peace talks began in Paris. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, and American troops withdrew. But fighting continued between North and South Vietnam. In April 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon. Images of helicopters evacuating Americans from rooftops became symbols of defeat. Vietnam was unified under communist control. The war was over. Chapter 8: Aftermath and Legacy. The consequences were profound. Over 58,000 American soldiers killed. Millions of Vietnamese dead. Deep political divisions in America. Veterans returned home to a divided nation. Many struggled with trauma, later known as PTSD. The war led to reforms limiting presidential war powers. It reshaped U.S. foreign policy for decades. America became more cautious about large-scale military interventions. Conclusion: the Vietnam War was more than a military conflict. It was a battle of ideology, perception, and political will. It showed that technological superiority does not guarantee victory. It proved that public opinion can shape the outcome of war. And it left scars in Vietnam, in America, and in history. Today, Vietnam and the United States have diplomatic relations. Former enemies have become partners. But the lessons of Vietnam remain relevant. War changes nations. War changes people. And sometimes, the greatest battles are fought not on the battlefield, but within society itself. Vietnam and America war-making movies. 1. Apocalypse Now, meaning a journey into the madness of war. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola, this film follows a U.S. Army officer sent deep into the jungle to assassinate a rogue colonel. It shows the psychological horror of the Vietnam War. Tet Platoon, meaning a military unit, small group of soldiers. Directed by Oliver Stone, a Vietnam War veteran himself. The movie shows the real experience of American soldiers in the jungle and moral conflict within the Army. 3. Full Metal Jacket, meaning type of military bullet. Directed by Stanley Kubrick. The film shows brutal military training and later the horrors of combat in Vietnam. 4. The Deer Hunter, meaning a person who hunts deer. The story follows 3 friends whose lives are changed forever by the Vietnam War. It focuses on emotional trauma and life after war. 5. Born on the 4th of July, meaning born on American Independence Day. Based on the true story of Ron Kovich, a soldier who becomes paralyzed in Vietnam and later becomes an anti-war activist. 6. We Were Soldiers, meaning a reflection on soldiers who fought bravely. Based on the Battle of Ia Drang in 1965. It shows leadership, sacrifice, and intense battlefield scenes. 7. Good Morning Vietnam, meaning a radio greeting in Vietnam. Stars Robin Williams as a radio DJ bringing humor to soldiers during the war. Mix of comedy and serious war themes. And Hamburger Hill, meaning nickname for a deadly battle location. Based on the real 1969 Battle of Hamburger Hill. Shows the brutality and heavy casualties of war.